there, storytellers. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to a new series I'm going to be doing called 5 by 5. Essentially, this new series is going to be sort of along the lines of a book review, but more compressed. I'm not going to lie, I am not a person who spends a ton of time thinking about the reasoning behind why I'd give a review for a book or a rating, because I don't usually write reviews, so I'm not in the habit of it. But this is sort of going to be my version, at least for a little while here. Once I get more into the swing of things, I will probably work on uploading more reviews, but I will probably also only reserve that for books that I really strongly have feelings for, and most of the time I enjoy books but I don't have very strong feelings about them, so I don't put an abundance of thought into why I'm rating it a certain way. I usually just go with my gut, if that makes any sense. Basically, I'm going to start off the way you'd start a review. I'm going to tell you about a book I've read and give you sort of that rundown slash synopsis of what it's about, and then instead of going into the nitty-gritty of why I'd be giving it a certain kind of review, I'm going to tell you 5 things I enjoyed about it and 5 things I really didn't enjoy about it. And I think that's a good sort of starting place on building my critiquing and reviewing skills. So without any further ado, let's get into my first 5 by 5. Well Met is an adult contemporary romance that follows the story of Emily, who has just moved to Willow Creek, Maryland in order to help her sister, who has been in an accident recently and is doing physical therapy and needs assistance. When she moves to town, Emily understands that her life isn't quite in the direction she had been hoping it was going, and she views this as an opportunity just to grow a little bit as a person. Little does she know there's going to be more strings attached than she first thought, as she ends up being roped into the local summer Renaissance fair because her niece can't be a part of it without an adult volunteer. Enter Simon, who runs the Renaissance fair and is a teacher at the local high school. Initially, Simon and Emily do not like each other at all, which, you know, I feel like is a classic romance trope, but inevitably things progress, but in a very confusing manner. Emily and Simon don't seem to get along, but their Renaissance fair characters seem to have more than enough chemistry, to the point where it starts to have Emily wondering if she's going to be sticking around once the fair is over, even though she had planned to leave after the summer. Overall, I feel like Well Met was a pretty good book and definitely a fun summer read. So now I will give you my 5 positive things that I enjoyed about this book. Number 1, Renaissance fair. I really don't feel like I need to say more. I absolutely love the idea of a Renaissance fair. I myself have never been, and I'm dying to go, but alas, the world's current situation has not made that possible this year, so another year I will have to try to make that happen. But I absolutely adored reading about it. I thought the author did a great job describing what a Renaissance fair experience would be like in person, not only because she had actually worked in one herself, but because she clearly has a passion for them, and it showed. 2, without giving too much away, I will say that I really love Emily's character growth. She starts out very insecure, both sort of naturally and as a result of the recent event in her life that happened just prior to her sister's accident. I don't want to spoil it because it is a major point for her growth and the story, but I think she comes a long way, and I appreciated that in a protagonist because it's often very rare in romances, I personally feel like, the ones that I've experienced, that the character really does much growth. They sort of grow into a relationship, but they either sort of go into it fully formed in themselves, or, you know, they do a little realizing, but it's not quite as much character growth, and I felt like Emily had a really good amount of it. Number 3, the cast of characters, both in their development and in sort of the ratio, and I'll explain that in a second. In terms of development, I thought there was a really fun and unique group of people. They were slightly varied over age ranges. Even Emily and her sister are sort of further apart in age, so it really lended itself to not getting stuck in that sort of YA campiness, I guess, that like YA romances fall into because the characters are all younger. Emily herself is 25, so she would sort of be just at the edge of that end of the YA spectrum, sort of still a young adult, but not quite in the sense of learning and developing through your teen years. So it was really interesting to see how she grew, but also how she played along with the local bookstore owner, who is also part of the Renaissance Fair, but is an older woman, or her own older sister who she loves but doesn't have a great relationship with or a great bond with because of their age difference and things like that. And my other caveat to why I like the cast of characters is because so many of the characters are women, which I feel like is not something I would have seen recently in romances myself. That's not to say there aren't other ones out there, I just haven't found them, but it can be really easy for something like a romance to focus on boy meets girl, or girl meets girl, or boy meets boy, and vice versa. All those things, right? It's really easy to focus on the core couple and not so much the other characters, and I felt like the other characters and their dynamic with the core couple was really well developed, but there wasn't a ton of focus on the male characters. There was definitely a strong focus on female relationships and female bonding, which I thought was pretty cool. Number 4, I liked the characters' ages. That sounds a little bit weird, but I really appreciated that I was reading the story about a 25-year-old falling in love, because I'm a 25-year-old, and it was refreshing to see a character struggle with feeling like they don't have their life together, but feeling like they should, and thinking that maybe the guy likes them, but maybe he doesn't, because people are very often under the assumption that you sort of deal with all that as a teen, and then you kind of figure it out, and you're good to go from there. But so many people nowadays, my age and even older, don't have it figured out yet. And they don't know when they're going to have it figured out or how they're going to figure it out. So it was cool and refreshing to see a character at my own age that is going through sort of the same things I would be going through, and figuring out how she wants to proceed with her life, and whether or not she wants to put her roots down in this one spot or not, and whether or not certain decisions and their consequences are worth it. I'm trying so hard not to spoil things right now. But it was cool to see that. I enjoyed having a character very much be my age and my sort of representation in a book. Number 5, I enjoyed the romance. Obviously, if I wasn't at least a little bit of a romantic at heart, I wouldn't have picked a romance book from Book of the Month when you legitimately have the option to pick something other than a romance. So, there you go. But I enjoyed the romance in the sense that it wasn't too hurried at all. I am okay with instant attraction. I'm not quite okay with insta love. It gets a little too far-fetched for me. And this book definitely doesn't start as an insta-lovey situation. They're not even insta-like. So there's some ground to cover before they sort of end up meeting in the middle, but I definitely liked the way it was done. I felt like the characters responded to certain things each other said in a very realistic way most of the time, and I appreciated that, because often it's either too over the top or not over the top enough. And I felt like it was very realistic that certain things would be taken out of context and other things might seem innocent to one person, but the other points out that there's actually a bigger problem in what the other said. So it was very realistic in its portrayal of how communication within a relationship or a budding relationship goes, and I liked that. Okay. Now on to the things that I didn't love so much about this book. First dislike. It's a minor grievance. It certainly didn't affect my enjoyment of the story at all, but it is a detail that I sort of noticed and got under my skin a little bit for whatever reason. But Emily joins the Renaissance Fair so her niece can do it, and her niece is barely a supporting character, I would like to say. She shows up, she's there, she interacts, but she's also really not strongly part of the narrative, and I thought it was kind of interesting that it was really a big deal that she was giving up her summer for her niece, and then you hardly saw her. It didn't make or break the story in any way, but it was just a minor grievance that I had with it. Something I needed to get off my chest, if you will. Number 2, I got a little bit frustrated with Emily's sort of fixation on her past. Not that a past doesn't help to shape who you are and the decisions you will make going forward, but there were some moments where it just, I know in a lot of books there's a certain amount of repetition because it's trying to drive home a point. This is where the character started, this is where they're going to end up. You're supposed to be able to see their growth, so fine and good, but there were just some moments where she just chose to focus on that instead of focusing on other context clues that would help her decipher the situation, or choosing to ask another character what they might have meant in that moment that would help her decipher the situation. And it was just, she fell into sort of a pattern of thinking that was frustrating, in part because it was very realistic. We all do it. We all get stuck thinking about this bad decision I made in the past, and how am I going to deal with it, and am I going to make that mistake again? And so I understood why she was doing it and what the point of it was, narratively speaking, but it was frustrating nonetheless. Number 3, I had a bit of an issue with the bond between Emily and her sister. I get that there's an age difference. I get that that can make bonding hard, even if you love the person. I myself have some fairly sizable age gaps between me and my siblings, but I just got a little annoyed with them, to be perfectly honest. Especially her sister. Emily comes to Willow Creek to help her sister April after she's been in an accident, and she can't care for herself and her daughter at the same time because she's injured, which I don't feel is giving away anything because that's literally the first 2 pages of the book. You get it right away. I'm not spoiling the story for you, but as time progresses in the story, they definitely do develop a better bond and a better understanding of one another, but it's like almost not enough. Like, by the time they start to get around to doing that, I don't know how to describe it, in an adult and nuanced sort of way, it's almost the end of the story, and you're just sort of left to focus on this other relationship that she's building throughout the story. But I almost wanted her to develop that relationship with her sister more, because she's there to help her, and you know, her sister sort of takes her for granted at first, and that Emily's kind of okay with it because it's the role she plays. She's a caregiver. She doesn't mind it. It's sort of something that fulfills her. It's something she naturally does. But I minded it because her sister just sort of didn't thank her, took her for granted, and it was kind of frustrating to watch because she sort of kept treating her like she was a little kid and was not recognizing that she was now dealing with her younger sister, the adult. And I suppose that was probably natural. That might be something that would happen realistically, but it was just, as a person who has pretty close relationships with her siblings, despite an age gap, it was a little frustrating to read when I wanted more out of their relationship. Number 4, the use of the, oh, X really likes someone else trope. Basically, what happens is Simon has started to develop an interest in Emily, and vice versa. But he starts acting kind of weird, because in character, at the Ren Fair, he flirts with her. As Simon, outside of costume, he's almost always angry with her, or so she thinks. So there's this conflict of emotions. Does he like me? Does he not like me? Is it all for show? Is it not? And then when it starts to tip the scale towards Simon might actually like her, she thinks it's all for show and actively sort of flirts a little bit with this other guy who's part of the Ren Fair, who is a known flirt. I mean, this man flirts with almost everyone all of the time. He's the town flirt. So it almost means nothing right away. She sort of has a thought about him at the beginning of the story, like, oh, this guy's kind of attractive, I might be interested in him. But pretty quickly, she decides he's just an attractive guy, he's funny, he's fun, but ultimately, he's a big flirt and he's not for her. And, of course, right as they're starting to build their romance, that's when she flirts with this big town flirt, and Simon gets confused and gets cold and distant. And we go through that whole, I thought you liked someone else, but you don't, and I thought you hated me, but you don't, kind of tete-a-tete, and it's annoying every single time. I know, logically, it has to be thrown in there. The characters need that wrench thrown in just to make getting to a relationship just that little bit harder. And I can't judge too harshly because in a story I am working on, it's gonna happen. But it's so annoying to read sometimes because it's not always how real life is. I'm sure some people have those moments, but a lot of people just sort of tiptoe around each other until they both figure out that they like one another, and then they date, and that's that. They go from there. So again, it's something that's part of the story. It was bound to happen from the second I picked up the book, but it is a grievance that I have with romantic plots and romantic subplots in general. But it won't ever stop me from reading them because I think somehow I also enjoy the frustration. Okay, final critique. Number 5 of the things I did not like about this story. And it's kind of a doozy, considering he's the male lead of the novel. But something I didn't like about this book, the Simon is kind of a jerk. And by kind of a jerk, I mean he's a jerk a lot of the time. Not even always with intent to be a jerk. They start out kind of getting on each other's nerves. He thinks she's not taking Ren Fair seriously enough, and she thinks he's taking it too seriously. And then she finds out why, and she's like, okay, there's emotional attachment here. I understand. And he's still kind of like, why are you so positive? Why are you trying to bring in new ideas? And they sort of just grouch at each other for a while. She suggests things and he gets mad about it. And that's how it starts. And then in character, he starts to flirt with her and she flirts back. And then it really starts to be them flirting with each other. And that's fine. But then the second he's out of character, he almost instantly goes back to being this cold, withdrawn guy. and not in that sort of reserved kind of way. It almost seems intentionally mean sometimes, which is not great in a guy a character is falling for, or a guy in real life that you're falling for. You don't want somebody who's going to be intentionally cruel to you. Being reserved and quiet is one thing, being cruel is another. So he bordered on cruel a few times, and there's this one major moment near the end of the story, which I won't spoil, that sort of big coming to a head climax, where he says something, he slips up and he says something that he doesn't see as a big deal, and it's sort of a unintentional reveal of his hand. It shows where his priorities lie, and he can't backtrack from it. And initially he can't see why it hurts Emily so much, and that's all fine. But she has this really awesome moment where she's sort of empowered and she stands up to him, and everybody supports her, and they're like, no, you were right to stand up to him. He was a total jerk in that moment. You absolutely should have done what you did. He had a lot of moments where I was just like, why is she waiting for this guy? When he's relaxed and goofy, sure, but he's not even remotely nice to her when he's not relaxed and goofy. I mean, you can be tense, but if you're just outwardly putting someone down, even without thinking, when you're in a stress moment, it's kind of a knock. When he's in character at the Run Fair, it's a really fun read. It has its ups and downs and its positives and its negatives, which is why I had some things I enjoyed about it and some things I didn't. But that is it for this video. That is it for Well Met by Jen DeLuca. I would recommend it if you're looking for a summer contemporary read. Let me know if you enjoyed this video by leaving a like down below. And if you want to see more of 5x5s, please do leave a like or a comment letting me know, because I think I like this format, and I would be excited to do it again with another book that I've read. But for now, don't forget, you can click the subscribe button to keep up with me and all my bookish adventures, and you can always ring the little bell so that you don't miss a beat. I'm going to go. I will catch you guys next time. Bye!